Hi everybody, this is the first of several videos we'll be doing on our unit Business and the Environment. So in this first video we'll be talking about some of the global environmental problems facing society right now. Then we'll look at some of the things government is doing to protect the environment, and then some of the things businesses are doing to protect the environment, and then finally look at some of these things in the case of hydraulic fracturing or fracking. Can the environmental impacts be reduced? Okay, so the first subject, global environmental issues. You guys may be familiar with this concept of the commons, or the phrase tragedy of the commons or paradox of the commons. So this goes back to medieval England, Europe, where they had these common spaces, grass, where people in the local community could come with their livestock and have their animals graze. And, that worked well in many contexts, but in some places, some problems with management arose as more people in the area have more livestock and take those livestock to the commons to graze, and there are more and more animals on the commons and less space for them until eventually the commons are overrun and there's not enough grass for all of the animals and the resource is essentially used up. So this was a problem for those communities, but it's also just a parable for other more contemporary issues like fisheries. So a commons is thought of here as a shared resource such as land, air, or water that a group of people use collectively. So no one individual owns that resource, but they have a sort of collective ownership of it. And so the tragedy is if all individuals attempt to maximize their own private advantage in the short term, the commons can be destroyed and all users, present and future, lose out. So we see a similar dynamic, as I said, with fisheries, where overfishing happens and you have what was once a really bountiful area for a particular kind of fish, like cod off the coast of Massachusetts, where I'm from originally, was overfished, and then there's a shortage as basically the resource is depleted almost down to zero. And so what was happening with fisheries is a lot of efforts to try to prevent people from fishing for a certain period of time to allow those communities of fish to build back up. But anyway, the solution to these problems is restraint, either voluntary or through mutual agreement. So the problem with commons, tragedy of the commons, these are problems of collective action. How can we as individuals all agree that we have to limit our consumption of a particular resource in order to preserve that resource? So this is something that we see coming back to play with a lot of environmental issues that revolve around the consumption of limited resources. Okay, so next I'll be talking about a series of problems, 5 problems that are facing society right now. So these should be familiar to you in some form, but we'll go into maybe a little bit more detail. So the first, climate change. Changes in the Earth's climate caused by increasing concentrations of carbon dioxide and other pollutants produced by human activity. So the causes are several: burning of fossil fuels, increased emissions of nitrous oxides, black carbon, deforestation, beef production. So many different things that we're doing in society are releasing into the atmosphere greenhouse gases that are actually warming the surface of the planet. So this gives you an illustration of how it works. So you have this infrared energy coming to the Earth from the sun, and it reflects off the Earth's surface, and usually, sort of dissipates back out into space, except in the case of greenhouse, where a lot of greenhouse gases have built up. The greenhouse gases effectively bounce that infrared energy back to the surface and continue to warm the planet even further. So, the concept of a greenhouse you may be familiar with. You see these sort of glass structures outside. They're used in agriculture. And the principle is the same. They can be warmer than the outside air because the glass allows the energy from the sun to come in, but then it makes it harder for that energy to leave. And so you end up with an area that is warmer inside the greenhouse and maybe more hospitable to the kind of plants that you're trying to grow. But this is essentially what we're doing to planet Earth in releasing a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So there are normally some of those in the atmosphere anyway, and that's good, and it kind of keeps the Earth at the temperature that we like it. But now humans and human activity have resulted in a lot of additional greenhouse gases, and so it's warmed the planet up in a way that you may think is sort of unnatural or perhaps not as suitable to life on the planet today. Second problem, ozone depletion. So ozone is a bluish gas that floats in a thin layer in the stratosphere 9 to 28 miles above the planet. It's critical to life on Earth by absorbing dangerous ultraviolet light from the sun. Okay, so we like the ozone. The ozone keeps those dangerous types of light from the sun from coming down and giving us problems like skin cancer. Okay, but what has happened is, again, human activity released a lot of chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, which are manufactured chemicals, into the atmosphere. So these were produced for refrigerants, insulation, solvents of different kinds, propellants, and spray cans. Some of this stuff you guys maybe never saw in your lifetime. This problem dates back to before many of you were born. But these chlorofluorocarbons were breaking down the ozone layer. And so as a result, that dangerous ultraviolet light from the sun was coming down and harming people. Now, this is a problem that's actually slowly getting better, and I've provided a link here where you can read some more about that. People realized that CFCs were causing this problem and started to find alternatives. However, just like what we see in the case of global warming, there were a lot of people, particularly on the side of industry, the companies that had created these chemicals that were using them, that were trying to argue that, no, the problem's not CFCs, the science that's out now is inaccurate, and so, sort of casting doubt on a lot of the claims that were being made. But nevertheless, eventually, people came around on this issue, realized that CFCs were a problem, and started to seek out alternatives. And as a result, the ozone layer has been building back up again, which is a good thing. A third problem, resource scarcity. So both in terms of fresh water and arable land, these are obviously critical resources for our society, but they're increasingly in scarce amounts. So fresh water, only about 0.1% of the Earth's water is in lakes, rivers, and accessible underground supplies. Okay, so it's a blue planet, but a very small amount of that water is fresh and available for human use. By the early 2010s, water shortages had already caused the decline of local economies, and in some cases had contributed to regional conflicts. And so we know in California, and you can see some more information here, that water use is an issue, and conserving fresh water is an important priority for many communities. In terms of arable land, the world's arable land, which means land suitable for agriculture, is threatened with decline from soil erosion, loss of nutrients, water scarcity, salinization, and poor drainage. So it's important that humans have the ability to feed themselves. To do that, we need arable land, which means we need good land management. 4, the decline of biodiversity. So biodiversity refers to the number and variety of species and the range of their genetic makeup. Genetic diversity is vital to each species' ability to adapt and survive, and has many benefits for human society as well. So, if you think about a rainforest and all of the different species that exist in a rainforest, so many different species that are not even yet identified, by scientists. People go into the rainforest and discover new species all the time, and these we don't know actually all of the different ways in which this kind of biodiversity, genetic diversity, could be of use to human beings. What we do know is that some of those places, like rainforests with incredible biodiversity, are under threat, for example, from deforestation. People cutting down rainforests to use for logging, or to use that land for cattle ranching, for beef, or for agriculture. So scientists estimate that species extinction is occurring at 100 to 1,000 times the normal background rate due to pollution and habitat destruction. So again, this is a resource that once it's destroyed, it's gone forever. You destroy, a species goes extinct, it's not coming back. So that's something that's happening now and is of great concern to many people. Finally, we have threats to marine ecosystems. Marine ecosystems consisting of oceans, salt marshes, lagoons, and tidal zones that border them, as well as diverse communities of life they support. So saltwater covers 70% of the Earth's surface and supports many species. So the threats to these ecosystems include exploitation of fish populations, as I talked about at the beginning of the video, the decline of coral reefs, coastal development in ecologically fragile areas, ocean acidification. So, in California, actually, there has been, earlier on in California's history, there's been a lot of management around coastal areas, especially where there have been oil deposits and businesses that wanted to drill off the coast of California. Led to a whole bunch of regulations that forced businesses who are doing that to have the oil wells far off the coast, and have a bunch of other restrictions for them to follow in order to preserve those habitats, both for the animals that live there and also for people who want to enjoy the beautiful California coastline. So we can't take these kinds of things for granted. Actually, California is a very interesting place to live and to be studying the environment, because there are a lot of regulations that exist that have preserved the environment. So we see it in its current state today. It exists that way in large part because it's been protected. So we're able to see, for example, old growth redwood forests, because those forests have been protected. Again, we see this pristine coastline because the coastline has been protected, etc. So there are still major problems in California and around the world around the management of water, for example, or air quality. But nevertheless, we do see that there have been a lot of important strides made to protect the environment. So this gives you a sense, hopefully, of some of the major issues, environmental issues facing the world today. So in the next videos, we'll be talking about what government can do and has done to protect the environment, as well as what business can do.